Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about populism. So if you want to follow along, this is just the populism PowerPoint. But basically, populism is a movement in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s that tends to focus on farm and labor issues and restructuring the American political landscape to meet the challenges of industrialization. So, kind of middle to late age of enterprise, this populist movement pops up. It's going to morph into the progressive movement, which we'll talk about in the next module. But it kind of starts out as a farmer laborers movement. Now, farmers faced a number of problems: tariffs, railroad charges high prices, railroads charge high prices, low prices for crops, debt, overproduction, and even things like loneliness and isolation out on the farm. Basically, overproduction, the government and the railroad land grants had meant that the government and the railroads wanted people to go farm because if you don't have anybody settled along the railroads, if you don't have anyone developing the land, it just lays there. So railroads and the government are encouraging people to become farmers. More farmers equal more crops equal lower prices. It's just simple economics. The more supply, the lower the price. So I got some charts here that you can kind of see in 1800 what the yield was for crops, and then you can see by 1900 what some of these yields are. But you can see that production is going way up. So you got more people farming. You've also got better inventions, better ways of farming that allow farmers to harvest more crops. Debt is also a big problem farmers face. After the Civil War, grain prices decline. Farmers struggle to pay off debt. New farmers have to borrow money to get started. Old farmers have to borrow money to keep going. Farmers work harder to produce more so they can make more money, but because they produce more, this has the opposite effect of lowering prices. There's also in the 1880s that kind of kill a lot of cattle, make it hard to farm. So lots of farmers go bankrupt, they lose their farms. One textbook I read said that you could line up all the farmers that had lost their lands, and it would be a line 30 miles wide and 90 miles long. I think that's just in a single year. That's a lot of people. Um, Farmers also face problems from the railroads. In the Northeast, back east where all the big cities are, you have lots of railroads, you have lots of competition. If you don't like the freight rates from one railroad, you can go to another. Western farmers don't really have that luxury because there's not as many railroads out west as there are back east. So farm railroads, and the railroads really have the farmers in a tight position. If you're in Iowa or the Dakotas or Kansas or Nebraska or even farther west, and you produce wheat or corn, some type of grain, you really have to have the railroads because they take your produce back east and they sell it. If you really are stuck because you have to use the railroads, you can't just not sell your crop, otherwise, you'd really go out of business. Tariffs, that's also a problem that farmers face. I've kind of got a little chart here, if you look on slide 11, that kind of shows tariffs. Basically, let's say that America makes a tractor for $6,000. This is kind of the time before tractors, but I'm just using tractors. So, an American manufacturing firm makes a tractor for 6,000. Let's say England makes a tractor of similar quality for $5,000, underselling the American tractor. Farmers in America, even though they're patriotic, they want the cheaper tractor, right? Because they're struggling. So they'll buy the English tractor. So what the American government does is they slap a tax or a tariff on those English tractors. So let's say they slap a tax of $2,000 on. Now that English tractor costs $7,000, making the American-made tractor the cheapest one. Farmers still want to buy the cheapest product or the cheapest tractor, so now they buy the American tractor. So you can see how this would upset farmers because it forces them to pay higher prices for manufactured goods, but this would help American manufacturing, so help American industry. So in a way, tariffs kind of pit farmers versus industrialists, and because the Republicans support business, they tend to favor high tariffs. because the Democrats are more farm-based, they tend to oppose tariffs. There's also monetary policy problems. Economics for me is always kind of dry and hard to grasp, but basically America is on the gold standard, so all the money in circulation, all the paper money, all the coins, they're backed by gold in the American banking system, gold and not silver. So there's a limited amount of money in circulation. This tends to help businessmen and moneylenders, but it hurts people in debt. One of the things the populists want is they want the introduction of silver into the economy. So let's say there's a pile of gold. You can only print so much money based on that pile of gold. But if you all of a sudden have a monetary system based off gold and silver, well, now you can print a whole bunch more money because you have silver backing it up. So it's going to help the farmers because it's going to put more money in circulation. Farmers also face loneliness, but that's not really a problem the government can fix. So basically, farmers have all these issues. They start forming parties or organizations to deal with these issues. So you get the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry, you get the Greenback Party, you get the Farmers Alliances. These are just different groups, there's more. And all of these groups kind of coalesce into the Populist Movement. So you got the Grangers. Basically, they're a cooperative enterprise. Let's bring all the farmers together. Let's eliminate the middlemen. You know, there's somebody back east that kind of sells the grain that the farmers produce. The farmers are looking for a way to sell their produce right to the buyer. That way they can cut out the middleman and kind of get a better price for their crops. You can read the declaration of the Grangers movement on slide 16. National Farmers Alliances pop up in the 1880s. They're also focused on cooperation. Basically, the more farmers organize and join forces, the more powerful they are, the bigger voice they have. So it's kind of like labor unions or trade unions. There's a Texas Alliance that proposes a sub-treasury system. Basically, there's all these ideas. You know, if the prices are low, let's create a place where farmers can store their crops and not sell it. And then next year, when the prices go up, then they can sell it. And, you know, they want the government to give them a loan to get them through this year because they didn't sell their crops because they're waiting for a better price. You know, this might work, but what if next year the crop prices go even lower? You borrowed money to get you through 1 year, hoping you could pay it back in the next year when you sold your crops. Now you can't sell your crops this year either, and you're still in debt. Now you have to borrow more. So it's kind of this terrible cycle. Farmers basically have a real bad time, you know, the late 1800s all the way up until the, you know, mid 1930s with the Great Depression. The Greenback Party, they wanted the government to keep in circulation the greenbacks that were printed during the Civil War. They believed that the more money in circulation, the easier it is for farmers to pay off their debts. So basically, all these groups are moving together, and in 1892 they meet in St. Louis. They're fed up with the Republican and the Democrats. It's basically this groundswell of regular people. They start a new political party called the Populist Party. It's also called the People's Party. So the Populist Party is founded in the 1890s, but it had kind of been brewing in the 1870s and 80s and 90s. You can kind of read what their platform states, but if you look at slide 23, you can see this is basically what they wanted. You know, coinage of silver. They wanted federal loans to farmers. They wanted an income tax. They wanted public ownership of the railroads and the telegraph systems. They wanted the right to organize. They wanted a ban on private armies like the Pinkertons that would break strikes. They want an 8-hour workday. They want the free ballot. They want pensions for soldiers, immigration restrictions. That's because immigrants, when somebody goes on strike, there's always an immigrant ready to come take the job so the factory owner can fire you because there's always someone that wants to take your place. You know, if you're a worker and your factory goes on strike and there's nobody to replace your labor, then you have more power to bargain with your employer. But if there's tons of immigrants outside waiting for a job, you can go on strike all you want. The owner will just shuffle you out and bring in new immigrants. So the populists, the the People's Party, they want less immigration. They want political reforms like the initiative and the referendum. So they want to be able to recall corrupt politicians or do away with laws that they don't like. That would be a referendum. They want to be able to propose laws. That would be the initiative. They want one term limit for presidents. They want no federal subsidies to corporations, so no sweet deals for these corporations back east. They want to confiscate land from the railroads and give them to farmers. They want direct election of senators. Keep this list in mind on slide 23. Once we get to the progressives, you'll see how they basically accomplish a lot of this. The Omaha platform, you're going to read that, but that's kind of the statement of beliefs of the People's Party. They said, we believe that the power of the government, in other words, of the people, should be expanded as rapidly and as far as the good sense of an intelligent people and the teachings of experience shall justify, to the end that oppression, injustice, and poverty should eventually cease in the land. So the populists are all about expanding the power of government to deal with the problems of industrialization. One of the most famous populists was a lady named Mary Elizabeth Lease. She was from Kansas. She was a real famous populist. Women play a big role in the populist movement. And if you think about frontier life, when you're going to settle the frontier, whether you're the husband or the wife, the head of the household, everyone has to be involved. Women take a huge part in frontier life because you're fighting for your survival. If life is harsh on the frontier, everyone has to participate. So women play a big role in the political movement of populism. Mary Lease famously said that farmers needed to raise less corn and more hay. That was kind of her famous advice for farmers. Start getting out there, get your voice heard. Now, the populists are pretty amazing as a party in the sense of how much they accomplish early on. They don't last very long, but they do accomplish a lot politically, I guess, as far as getting elected early on for just a brand new party. In the election of 1892, you have the populists running for president. So Grover Cleveland is the Democrat, Benjamin Harrison is the Republican, and then you got James B. Weaver as the populist candidate. And if you look at the map on slide 28, you can see how Cleveland wins a lot of states, Harrison wins some, but the green states are the ones that Weaver wins. So he wins a lot kind of out west. And if you zoom in, look at slide 29, you can basically see how even though he didn't win all those states, he got a huge amount in each of the states. So like he lost Nebraska, but he got 45% of the vote. Wyoming, 47% of the vote. Oregon, 44%. So some of these states that they lost, they still get a lot of vote. They elect people to Congress. They elect governors. So the Populist Party, even though they don't win a presidential election, they do really well. So 1892 is not a failure by any stretch of the imagination for populists. They're a new party. Nobody expects you to do well right when you start out in politics. So they decide to try again in 1896. 1896 is a very weird election. You've got two candidates, but three parties. William McKinley, he runs for the Republicans. He's from Ohio. And then you got William Jennings Bryan, a really young man from Nebraska. He runs as a populist and a Democrat. So basically what ends up happening is one of the biggest issues is monetary policy. Normally, we're not used to that being a really exciting issue, but that is in 1896. You basically get people that support gold as the only backing for our system of money. They vote McKinley. So there's gold Democrats, there's gold Republicans. So it doesn't matter what party you're in. If you support gold, you vote for McKinley. Then you've got silver Democrats and silver Republicans. Some people wanted to add silver to the monetary system so that we could put more money in circulation. So if you support silver, you support Bryan regardless of your party. So there's a lot of cross-party voting. Like I said, Bryan was a young man. He was from Nebraska. The populists pick him to be their candidate, and the Democrats pick him to be their candidate. So you have Bryan running for president from two different parties. And this political cartoon on slide 34 kind of shows you how it seems like the populists are swallowing up the Democrats. The kind of funny thing is, though, the Democrats and the populists pick a different vice president. So over here you have Bryan and Arthur Sewell running as the president and vice president of the Democrat Party. And then over here you have William Jennings Bryan and Tom Watson running for the president and vice president of the Populist Party. Now Bryan loses. If he would have won, I'm not sure how they would have worked this out because he had two different vice presidents running with him. Um, During the election, he gives a really famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech. And basically, he says, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold." So, those people that want a strict monetary policy, a very austere kind of government, they don't want silver being thrown into the economy. So the bankers, the industrialists, they favor gold, whereas the workers, the farmers, kind of the lower people economically, they tend to favor silver. But William McKinley ends up winning. He's the gold man. He's the high tariff man. He's kind of the safe candidate, favored by businessmen. Um, his vice president Garrett Hobart dies in 1899. That's important later on. Just remember that. But McKinley wins. You can see he basically wins all the populous states, kind of the Northeast, and then he wins out on the West Coast as well. Bryan, a Democrat, wins the solid South because the Democrats always vote Democrat, or the South always vote Democrat because of segregation. And then you get a lot of Western states voting for Bryan because of the populist thing. So just keep in mind the populists aren't a big factor in American history because eventually they get swallowed up by this new movement called the Progressive Movement. But we'll talk about that more in the next module.